Okay.
Great. Okay, so we will start. Thank you very much to all of you who join us in our first webinar and first meeting open to everyone. We are really excited about this initiative, and I think this project is starting. It already started like a couple of months ago, and we are really surprised and happy of all of the people that already joined us. And our purpose is to make it bigger and to achieve people of different regions and fields. So thank you very much to all of you who join us, and especially to our amazing speakers. We're really excited to talk with them, with Eddy, with Jabri, with Howard, and with Gulnaz. And first, I would like to use this opportunity to explain a little bit about what is the Sustainability Ambassadors of Chevening, what is our purpose, what is the our main goal with this organization. So, if Catherine, if you, can you um, put the slides, please? Thank you. In the meantime, I will be talking and then the speakers that will also talking. But if you have any question, any comments that you want to share with us, you can use the chat, or you can raise your hand and we can make it like more of a conversation. And maybe the big question, we can do it at the end. So in that way, it will be a little bit more organized our times. Catherine, can you put the first slide, please?
One moment. I had some problems here. One moment. I will send to you.
Okay. But I think you were sharing okay. It's just you need to put like the first slide, but everyone was looking the presentation. But if it's not, I will try to share myself. You prefer?
Please.
Okay, so can you see my screen? My screen? Nice. So we use this. As you know, our name is Sustainability Ambassadors of Chevening. This is a network that is mainly of Chevening scholars and alumni, but which purpose is broader than that. The idea is not only be part of the people of Chimney, but is like the root or our starting point of how we want to achieve a better impact in the world. So, what is our mission and purpose is to be catalyst for change, initiating a leading project with a tangible impact in our local communities. So, as ambassadors, the idea is to use the voice of Chevening in the field of sustainability, participating in global events and creating content that amplifies the program message. So, as we know, we are more than 100 people join this network right now. The idea is to make it like even bigger, and especially to have a participation of people of different countries and regions of the world. That I think is something really important when we are talking about sustainability, and the topic of this session, that is climate impact, is really important to make the difference between the regions and the different challenge that the people has to deal with. So we already defined some main tracks. This is like our group of work. And the idea is to use this track as a topic or thematic working groups, so then we can focalize our initiative in a better way. So our first track is about policy, governance, and law. And as delegates, we have Pablo Sebastián Díaz Pinto and myself. And the idea is this group to explore how public policy, law, and governance can drive climate action and sustainability issues. We want to create just development strategies, protection of human rights, and foster international cooperation. Then we have a second group that is about sustainability finance, business, and ESG, where the delegates are Caterine Valderrama and Adaharo Tutane. This group specifically is focused more in the private sector, how we can use the private sector to unlock finance and investment for sustainability and climate action, how we can make contribution to the public sector and analyze in a better way the role of the green finance and impact of investing and responsibility of companies. In the third way, we have the energy infrastructure and communities, where the delegates are Swami Perez Ortega, Julieta Cumplido, and Chatatsky Tripathi. And this group is dedicated to energy transition, decarbonization, and climate action. It focuses on transforming our energy system infrastructure to cut carbon emissions and to have a greener present and future. Some of the things about energy transition are related with the topic that we're going to discuss today. On the fourth track is science, innovation, and technology, where we have the delegates, one of our speakers of today, that is Eddy Frank Vásquez, and also Eduardo Garcia. And this group plays science, technology, and clean tech innovation, and try to understand how this technology advancement, cutting-edge research could be a driver and could help us in achieve our sustainability and climate action goals. And finally, we have the group of global health, food security, and biodiversity, where the delegates are Valeria Morales and Sofia Aroca. And this group is implicated in the intersection between health, global health, incorporating environmental health and human health, and addressing this link with biodiversity, sustainability, livelihoods, and food security. Then at the end of this session, Caterina is going to explain what type of initiative with these groups want to address, especially for next year. Well, this is the type of things that we are doing and we're planning to do. As I said, this is the first of our events, but the idea is to do even more, and especially to have more in-person events to see ourselves, so we can discuss in a better way. That's everything that I want to say about the sustainability ambassadors. And I want to, okay. I want to present now our speakers. As I say, we're really excited to have them here, to have this conversation with them. And first, I want to start presenting our first speaker, that is Eddy Frank Vásquez. As I said, he is a Chevening scholar from the Dominican Republic, and he is studying a master in behavioral science at the University of Glasgow. Eddy is a Dominican climate policy specialist and AOSIS adaptation negotiator, recognized for bridging technical expertise with on-the-ground resilience work across the Caribbean. He has been involved in the UN climate negotiation at the COP since 2015. So COP30 was not his first COP. He has been working on this for many years. And his work spans international negotiations, government advisory roles, and the design of community-level resilience. He has also served as adaptation coordinator for AOSIS since 2022, and specifically during COP30, he led negotiation on the global goal on adaptation, indicators, and NIPS, helping shape strategies for small island states at a critical moment for global climate ambition. So thank you very much, Eddy, for joining us in our conversation. And I would like to ask you if you can talk to us about your experience of participating in COP30 negotiation. What are the main challenges regarding the global goal on adaptation, and if there's any outcome on the negotiation to support developing countries in their adaptation to the impacts of climate change? So we would like to hear you.
Thank you, Catalina, for the welcome and welcome everybody to this first session on climate change that we're having as part of the Sustainability Ambassadors of Chevening. My name is Eddy from Vásquez, as it was said before, and for me it's a huge pleasure to be sharing with you some of the experiences that we got during the negotiations of COP30. Just to make it a little bit more maybe graphic, I will be sharing a very brief presentation with all of you, just with some main sentences. But in order to start, I would like to say, as Catalina mentioned, my role in the COP is usually related to negotiations. I represent the Dominican Republic governments on the negotiation, specifically on the topic of climate adaptation. And on behalf of the government, I also represent the voice of 39 small island states country as a member of AOSIS. AOSIS is the Alliance of Small Island States, which is one of the many geographical groups that are inside the negotiations, as we have Latin American groups, African groups, Arab state groups. We also have a group for all the small island states, since a small island have a peculiar vulnerability when it comes to climate change. So my role is basically talking on behalf of those 39 nations when it comes to climate adaptation and trying to get their needs, but also their strengths into the conversation and how that's done. So when it comes to this COP, actually, this was meant to be the COP of many things. This was meant to be the COP of implementation, 10 years since the Paris Agreement. This was supposed to be the COP of truth, the first COP that happened after the finalization of the rulebook of the Paris Agreement, and the COP of adaptation, which for the Brazilian presidency, who was the host of this COP this year, had the topic of adaptation as the main agenda in their outcomes and in their policy work as well. So basically, these negotiations, even though that adaptation was the main topic, of course, we have negotiations on all related topics to the United Nations, from finance, from mitigation, just transition, gender, and other topics as well. Going to the negotiations, as it was said before, we had two main agenda items related to adaptation. From one side is the global goal on adaptation, and from the other side is the national adaptation plans. When it comes to the global goal on adaptation, we're talking about, there's a way that we usually measure mitigation. We say we want to reduce the greenhouse emission by X%, or we want to limit the rise of temperature to 1.5 Celsius degree, almost to 2 Celsius degree. But when it comes to adaptation, measuring adaptation is quite difficult. And it's difficult because adaptation is context specific. Adapting in the Dominican Republic is different from adapting in the United States. And adapting in the United States is different from adapting in any of the countries of Europe. So talking about adaptation is always difficult. And in order to measure adaptation progress, you need to have a tool that takes into consideration the different realities, the different needs, the different contexts. And that's what we have been doing in negotiation for the last 6 years since the COP happened here in Glasgow, in the COP26. In Glasgow, it was established the need to create a global goal and adaptation and a methodology and a set of targets and indicators that could help us to measure that reality. So since the COP26 in Glasgow to the COP30 in Belém, we had almost 5 years of technical work, developing that goal, developing a framework for the targets, and developing and currently adopting, which was one of the main outcomes of COP, the indicators. And besides the global goal on adaptation, we also have the national adaptation plans, and the national adaptation plans are, let's say, a policy product that each country have in order to say, okay, this is the way that I'm going to adapt in the different contexts, ecosystems, and with the different communities that I have. So in COP30, we were negotiating those two things, how to agree on indicators for the global goal on adaptation, and how to do the assessment, the review of the last few years of the NAPs. Whenever I say NAPs, it's related to national adaptation plans. In COP, we talk a lot about small words, and this usually is a very bad habit, but NAPS means National Adaptation Plan, and GGA means Global Goal on Adaptation, just to make it easier for you. So how to navigate the results? What we got in the negotiation, they were some of the most difficult negotiations I've been for the last 10 years of COPs. And it was difficult because everything happened in the COP in Belém. We got evacuated 2 times, once due to a protest that came into the venue with no authorization, and the second one was due to a fire that happened during that last few days of COP, and that interrupted the negotiation flow. And it was a lot of chaos as well, because when it comes to the negotiation, a lot of the conversation happens by the technical people and not technical people. And a lot of the conversation happens with the political people. The political people are our ministers or head of delegations or high-level representatives that are there that have closed-door negotiations that nobody really know what happens in those closed doors. So technicals develop an outcomes to the high levels, and the high level then decide for the whole conference. And it was a little bit chaotic because due to the different interruptions that we have during the 2 weeks, there was a lot of pressure in having an outcome. And for us, the outcome didn't look like at the end of the day how we want to shape it. We adopted indicators from the list of 100. We adopted 59 indicators that are currently measuring adaptation, but those 59 indicators were modified by the Brazilian presidency, which means that the technical work that was being done for the last few years was kind of ignored, and they modified the indicators in order to have an outcome, because we weren't able to properly have a middle point, a middle ground when it comes to deciding on those indicators. And the second thing is that we also agree on the revision of the national adaptation plans, the NAPs, but we didn't include any language that talk about the responsibility of the developed countries for the developing countries. There's no any kind of language or sentence or paragraph that talk about the financial commitments that they have done since COP1 in Germany till now. And for the last 30 years, we ignore that specific, making a reference to that commitment. And for us, that's quite concerning when we talk about the experience from developing countries, because we need means of implementation when it comes to adaptation. Means of implementation are finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. And if we don't have access to those coming from the developed countries, then our countries are going to debt in order to be able to face climate change. But what we did get into the final, what we call the Mutirão Declaration. The Mutirão is a global declaration that the Brazilian presidency created at COP, like touching base on many of the points that couldn't be agreed on other main topics. The Mutirão did talk about something important. It talked about tripling the adaptation finance. The currently flows of finance that go to the adaptation through the international financial institutions, the multilateral development banks, the international cooperation through bilateral, multilateral channels. It talk about tripling adaptation finance. In Glasgow, in the COP26 in Glasgow, we talk about doubling adaptation finance, and now we're talking about tripling. But even tripling is not enough. The current adaptation gap, financial gap, is about almost $400 billion a year. Imagine what it means, what is necessary to do in order to mobilize that amount of money. And currently, when we talk about tripling adaptation finance, we're maybe talking about not even half of it, not even half of those $400 billion a year. So even though that it was not what we wanted, it was let's say an outcome that nobody was expecting, to have tripling adaptation finance in the final declaration. and also talking about the indicators. What it means for the next few days, just to finalize, it means that our countries now has the responsibility to start reporting on these indicators, to start generating data for those indicators, and for 2028, when it's going to happen, what we call the GST. The GST is the global stock take. It's like a global balance that happened within the COP in order to see how we are, how much we need, what are the gaps, what are the strengths. In order to get the information to there, our countries need to start reporting on those indicators. But that generate a lot of burdens. We're talking about, imagine how difficult it is to collect data, to analyze data, to have people to know how to get and analyze that data in our countries. And sometimes doing that is difficult. So this COP of adaptation delivered, but it didn't deliver enough to be on the day-to-day of what's really needed for developing country when it comes to climate change.
Great. Thank you very much, Eddy, for your presentation. It was really interesting, and it shows the difficulties of this type of negotiation, all of the things that could impact, and that at the end of the day, you can have a type of outcome that you can think that is positive, but it's not always not as necessary at the type of measures that we need, especially in terms of adaptation. So if anyone has any question to Eddy, you can put it like in the chat. So maybe we can do it at the end of the presentation of all of the speakers. And yeah, thank you very much, Eddy.
Of course.
Now I will present our second speaker. He's Jabri Ibrahim. He's also a Chevening scholar, but he graduated with distinction from the Master of Science in Energy and Climate Policy at the University of Sussex. Jabri has also holds an academic background in climate and energy law and has formal training in environmental science. He currently serves as an associate at the Africa Climate and Energy Nexus. He is a transformative AI-enabled digital platform designed to amplify and accelerate Africa's climate and energy response. Jabri also currently serves as a member of the third cohort of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate and represented African youth perspective at the highest office in the United Nations. He also previously joined the Africa team of the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions, having worked at the stakeholder engagement team of the UNFCCC Secretariat and has prior multilateral experience with UNEP, Kenya Red Cross, and Credit Mullers Advocates. Jabri has contributed to regionalizing the UN Climate Change High-Level Champions Global Initiative for Africa, also across different COPs, so COP25, 26, 27, 28, 29, and now 30. So we know that he has many experience in that, and specifically in terms of energy transition and also in that impact in African countries. So we're really happy to having you here. I know you have like a really busy agenda and many events going on. So we're really welcome to have you in this conversation. And we would like to know about your experience at COP30. What is your view on the global energy response to climate change, and what specific challenges do African countries and communities face in this matter?
No, thank you so much, Catalina, and the rest of the team for having me. I'm so sorry for the very long introduction. I didn't know it would all be read, but thank you for welcoming me, and thank you, Eddy, for your presentation. I think it was really representative of what happened at COP. I think for me, something to note, I think it was good to start with the presentation from Eddy, because I think COP is for the negotiations primarily, yes. So the countries come in and negotiate on the treaty, not just the Paris Agreement, but the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The UNFCCC in it of itself is a negotiating treaty. So I think that's the main part of COP, but COP also involves other elements, including kind of the political part of it, where countries coming together and launch initiatives, but also then what they call non-state actors. So this is where kind of the UN operates, big INGOs, and also corporations, so companies such as myself that are focused on social or environmental or climate goals also operate. So increasingly, COP is the biggest UN summit, bigger than the General Assembly, and it's calling on all the actors and elements of the economy. So I think I just wanted to say that. And then to answer your questions, I will touch on maybe 5 points, and I'd like to keep my response pretty short. I was at COP, at every COP I go to, I have a different hat. So for COP30, I was there with my company, kind of as an African-led company from Kenya, focused on project development, specifically for energy and climate projects. So I was there on that hat, as well as my climate advisory role within the UN. So that was where I operated within the COP process, whilst some of the governments were negotiating some elements around mitigation and adaptation. I think for COP, I think this COP, there was a real push on developing or getting all the countries that are party to the convention to sign up to two roadmaps: a fossil phase-out pathway and a just transition roadmap, kind of setting expectations for governments to phase out fossil fuels, by 2030, and then eventually by 2050, reaching a 1.5 aligned net zero scenario. That was not achieved. I think about 80 countries, which is, just over half, agreed on the roadmaps. This was one of the two big roadmaps that the COP president, which is Brazil, really thought by COP30 we'll get these two big endorsements and outcomes out of COP. I think, and the failure, or I would say it's a medium success, you get 80 countries to agree to this roadmap, but the failure to get it to consensus, all countries agreeing to it, it demonstrates two things. Number one, we're just in a very fragmented geopolitical space. The biggest, most richest, most powerful countries are no longer driving the climate agenda forward. They're actually putting the gears back, and they're working with allies from fossil giants, Saudi Arabia. So these two realities, often when they work in tandem together, not much can move forward. But I think the current reality is forcing a lot of us to look more away from the West and into the East, China, and into the South, the global South. And countries like Brazil are really in the driving seat. They don't have to look to Europe and America and someone else to tell them what to do, because those, for example, when the US left the UNFCCC process, it took with it some allies. Argentina fully left, and these countries will come back. This is a typical, if you've been following the process, Argentina will rejoin the UNFCCC process, and so will the US. But it's important to just keep track of which countries have been in the process, even when it was not, there's no incentive to do so. And number two, a big success was the tropical forest facility. Now, this, I wouldn't say was an outcome of the negotiation process, but because COP is such a driving force, it forces countries to come in together and think of something to demonstrate action. This was Brazil's big idea that if we get countries to commit funds and are forestry and do not deforest above 5%, they will have access to money, low interest concessional capital, etc. And Brazil put its own money in it. It got 3 billion from Norway, it got 1 billion from Germany, got 1 billion from Indonesia. So this was a big success coming out of COP, irrespective of what happens within the negotiations. And then for Africa, always Africa negotiates as a bloc, the Africa group of negotiators, always pushing for enhanced adaptation finance, which they got, and fairer implementation timeline. So Africa always argues that there are no emissions coming out of Africa separate to a few countries. Africa, since the history of time until now, has only accounted for less than 4% of global emissions. So Africa often asks for a fairer implementation timeline and a phase out aligned with justice. And I'll conclude in 1 minute, but I just want to say two last things. A big outcome of COP30, every 5 years, the UNFCCC asks countries to ratchet up to submit a new climate plan called an NDC every 5 years. Countries can submit earlier if they want, but within every 5 years, you have to submit a new climate plan more ambitious. And over 120 countries submitted new NDCs, renewed NDCs before or during COP30. Big achievement. I think Kenya's new NDC demonstrated a higher ambition. The narrative around Kenya was, it opened up by saying Kenya has played an oversized role in climate action. My country has never had a coal-fired power plant. Our electricity system is 92% renewable, and we are still committed to being climate ambitious. Meanwhile, the biggest polluters on Earth are not even part of the process. So that's a big tension in the process as well. And then the last thing I'll say is this is the first COP since Glasgow, COP26, almost 5 or 4 years ago, that civil society, it's legal to protest. In previous countries, it's illegal for civil society to mobilize. In Brazil, you could protest, which is a big part of a robust democracy, is being able to protest and to demonstrate civic disobedience. So, I mean, there was a big press, maybe a fantasy around that indigenous people broke into the blue zone. For people who are there, almost everyone I spoke to was in full support of the indigenous people, their right to being in the blue zone, and especially in Belém and in such close proximity to the Amazon. And number two, civil society should always be allowed to protest, because without that pressure outside the negotiating rooms, nothing ever happens in the negotiating platforms. So even negotiators, those like Kenya that want to push the agenda forward, if there's loud, robust protests outside of the blue zone, that is often a negotiating tactic that they can use and say, there's a lot of protests outside, we need to push the agenda forward. Okay, I'll stop there, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Jabri, for all of the topics that you discuss about. I think definitely there's important challenges in terms of geopolitical tension and what type of actors are represented in this type of negotiation and initiative, but at the same time that you can address some of the outcomes that we have of this process that I think is important to recognize. And also I like that the fact that you talk about the civil society being also part of this, even when it was more in the outside, then it immediately broke up in the inside. So it shows that it could not be something that you can separate from what is going on inside of the negotiations. So if anyone has any comment or wants to make some question to Jabri, we can do it like at the end of the session, at the same as with Eddy. Thank you very much. Now I would like to introduce our third speaker. He's Howard Mwesigwa. So I'm so sorry, Howard, if I'm saying wrong. I'm really happy to have you here. Howard is studying at the University of Edinburgh, as myself. So we already have some conversation together, and he's also a Chevening scholar from Uganda. He's studying a master in global environment and climate change law here at the University of Edinburgh. And Howard is a lawyer by training. He specialized in energy, environment, and climate change law and policy. He has served as chairperson of the European Union Youth Sounding Board, Uganda, and later as thematic lead of green and climate transition. Howard has also served as a team leader of the Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Department and Kalikumutina, and is a team leader at the Climate Action Leadership Incubator at Uganda and Speaker of the National Environment Parliament at Uganda as well. He has served internationally as the global contact point for the YOU Africa Youth Climate Action Plan and as a thematic lead on plastic, petrochemicals, and climate at the United Nations Major Group on Children and Youth, Chemicals and Waste Youth Platform. And I also know that Howard is an Earth Fellow at the Earth Center Initiative in Edinburgh. He's organizing some really interesting events related to COP and climate advocacy. So thank you very much, Howard, to being part of our conversation. And I would love to know your insight on your experience at COP30, and specifically we would love to hear your thoughts on how to make COPs more inclusive and what type of challenges we face in achieving climate justice.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Catalina. I'm really flattered and humbled by the introduction, and many thanks indeed to the preceding speakers, Eddy and Jabri. Great conversation, which I think has set the stage for the conversation. And just to pick it on from the last point that Catalina mentioned, I had the privilege of hosting the COP Cafe here in Edinburgh at the Edinburgh Earth Initiative, which was really looking at bringing young people together across the university to have conversations really on COP30, COP broadly, but COP30 in particular, and recognizing that many young people, and again, on the question of access, that many a time young people cannot afford, the £5,000, the 7,000 US dollars that one might need to attend a COP. And you find, for example, COP30 all the way in Brazil was really, 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 really expensive in many, many, many ways. I found that even season negotiators found it really difficult to navigate the logistical aspects around COP30 in particular. And so you find that if season negotiators would have a hard time, that probably have more access to funding, what happens to the young people who are trying to find their footing in the complex climate diplomatic world, but also when it comes to the local communities that are at the very forefront of the climate crisis, getting their voices amplified. So there are clear questions of accessibility. And sometimes we've also seen the question of tokenism, where you get just 1, 2, 3 young people, sprinkle them all over the place and say, okay, we've included the young people as well. And so the youth are meaningfully represented. So access really begins, I've seen, from the very stage of getting accreditation. Even getting accreditation to a COP is not easy at all for many young people. So that's the very first hurdle, getting to convince their national focal points, who usually have that latitude to grant these accreditation, becomes very difficult. But sometimes even when some of these badges are availed to youth groups, you find they're just about 3 or 4 of them, because some of them cannot get them from the national focal points. So that's a major challenge there. And I'll come back to that. So that's like hurdle number 1. And then you have hurdle number two, which comes to the finances. And I think Eddy alluded to this broadly. We usually call it the bracket is means of implementation, which looks at the finance, the capacity building, but also the technology development and transfer. So you find that for young people, you have that hurdle one on getting the badge, number two, getting the finance to get you to the COP, but sometimes even the capacity itself to meaningfully engage, right? Because you can be given the badge and given the funding to get you to the COP, but getting to understand, the complex language that is used in climate diplomacy, in climate multilateralism is another sort of challenge. And so at the COP Cafe, we're sort of bearing all of these in mind to see that. So we sort of got digital badges and we were streaming the COP processes. And I had the privilege myself to be in Brazil just the week before the COP Cafe, taking part in some of the pre-COP engagements. One of them was the Parliamentary Green Investment Dialogue that happened just a few days before the COP, but also there was also a build up to the Conference of Youth as well, which was happening in Brazil on the margins of COP30. So the idea really is that we need to find means of decentralizing some of these engagements to see that, for example, at the universities where we are, in our local communities where we sort of have platforms that can bring the proceedings at the COP to young people, to the local communities, to the national level, where we can have sort of decentralized participation. And one of the interventions has been through the COP digital passes that sort of give you access to the proceedings at the COP. Yes, there's still limitations, for instance, with interventions. But again, as you know, the interventions at the COP, and I think Eddy mentioned this, I think it was Eddy or Jabri who mentioned this, that happen in blocks. For example, Uganda, where I come from, negotiates through the African group of negotiators, through the G77 and China bloc, but also the least developed countries negotiating bloc. So you find that there's even getting to understand what the positions of the blocks is and harmonizing them sometimes is a challenge. And one of the things that I find really fascinating, and this is really, really, really ironic, and I'll make mention of this subsequently when I get into the context of COP30, is that whereas we talk about the absence of language on fossil fuel phase out, as you know, at COP28 in Dubai, it was one of those very sticky issues. And so there was this agreement to phase down and then eventually phase out, and yet the science from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is very clear that we need to phase out right now. Like, we cannot afford to have that kind of staggered long-term approach on phasing down and then phasing out. And of course, this has also brought into question some of these very interesting technologies around climate change. We've seen carbon dioxide removal, CDR, and then things to do with carbon capture and storage. All of these, techno fixes that we have seen. And so there's a great conversation around the credibility, around the efficacy of some of these technologies, but it's all because countries are trying to avoid that very difficult conversation that is that science is telling us is the sure way of keeping 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And so you find that some countries in the global south are among those countries that are against the phase out of fossil fuels. For example, when you see the position of the African group of negotiators, many countries in the global south that belong to that bloc, even G77 and China, you find that many of them are opposed to the idea of a phase out of fossil fuels. Look at Brazil, for example, just a few weeks before COP30, just, sort of issued new fossil fuel exploration licenses. So you can imagine, and that wasn't just Brazil. The same was true for Baku, Azerbaijan, a major oil producer, and that was COP29. The same is true of COP28 in the UAE, a major oil producer. So some of these challenges really sort of have the effect of bringing into question the credibility of the COP process, and yet we know that that's really where climate justice lies. And that brings me back to the question of the context. And the context, COP30, the context is very, very peculiar because there are three developments that I want us to focus on as well, that sort of transpired ahead of the COP30, and one of them was the decision of the International Court of Justice on the obligations of states when it comes to climate change, and it said so many things, clarified on so many issues, so many aspects, and I just want to mention three of them. One of them was to do with fossil fuels, that indeed states need to cut down, need to phase out fossil fuels because the continued investment in fossil fuels can be termed as an internationally recognized wrongful act, and that states can be held accountable and liable in that regard. But number two, also the clarification on the question of 1.5 degrees Celsius. The court noted that whereas much of the global discourse has been on 2 degrees Celsius, and again, that's the language that is used in the UNFCCC, the language that is used in Article 2, Article 2 of the Paris Agreement as well. But the court interpreted that whereas the requirement is to keep it below 2 degrees Celsius, the requirement, then the primary temperature goal is 1.5 degrees Celsius. So what does that mean? And that really, again, is in tandem with the position of the IPCC that any overshoot over and above 1.5 degrees would pose catastrophic ramifications to the world, the global climate system, but of course, recognizing that it would have disproportionate effects to the communities that are at the very forefront of the climate crisis. But finally, among the many things that the court clarified was to do with the requirements for the NDCs. So many countries had proposed that the requirements under the NDCs are sort of like discretionary, and so states, because the requirement under Article 4 of the Paris Agreement requires them to prepare, to communicate and maintain these NDCs, and then they should be progressive, but also they should also reflect their highest possible ambition, of course, within the 5 years that they're required. But so states sort of will take that it's because, again, the operative principle there is the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And so states would sort of interpret that as, some sort of discretion that they have regardless in going about the NDCs. But the court interpreted that that the states have a stringent requirement in terms of due diligence to ensure that the NDCs are able to contribute collectively to keeping the global temperature within 1.5 degrees. And I felt like that was a major step in ensuring that the true commitments to the rights of frontline communities and holding states accountable to the 1.5 degrees Celsius is maintained. But I think what then remains in that regard, in the context of justice, in the question of equity, is to see how then we transfer the position of the court into holding states accountable to put the aspirations and the needs of frontline communities, of indigenous groups, of the communities at the very forefront of the climate crisis, putting them front and center in their climate action plans. And then the second one was to do with the UNEP emissions gap report. And actually, the title of that report is really, really, really interesting. And it's called Off Target. That's the name of the report, Off Target. So that's the UNEP emissions gap report 2025, indicating that states are falling too short, way shy of their requirements to cut emissions. And that also indicates that that kind of fragmentation that Jabri mentioned and talked about is still alive and is still marring the global climate efforts and also being reflected in the global climate diplomacy and in multilateral processes around climate change. But the other one, as I prepare to conclude, is the UNFCCC NDC synthesis report. And at the time when we were starting COP30, we only had, I think, about 64, 65 nations that had submitted their NDCs at that time. So the report could not cover so much. And even then it indicated that within the states that had submitted their NDCs at that time, they were still falling short of keeping the 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. And also the recognition that at COP, I think 1 in 25 participants was a fossil fuel lobbyist. So you find that the space that should be occupied by the voices, by the forces that are committed to the cause that should be represented meaningfully. They cannot be represented because that space has been occupied by people that do not believe that climate change is an existential crisis that needs urgent action, and their interest is in furthering their own corporate, their own capitalistic aspirations and commitments, and choosing profits over people. So you find that ultimately the question of access goes back to some of those very difficult conversations. But again, we need to think about COP in this way, and I love to look at it this way. But I mean, it's an imperfect process, and that's the truth. It has its shortcomings, its shortfalls, and it's incremental in a sense that we've seen, from COP1 in 1995 in Berlin to COP30, we're still around, negotiating. What are we negotiating exactly for the last 3 decades? But when you think about where the world would have been, and the science speaks to it, without the COP processes, the world would have been close to, an increase of 4 degrees, between 4 to 5 degrees Celsius, without, the contributions that have been made through the UNFCCC, through the Kyoto Protocol, through the Paris Agreement, that the world would have been headed to 4 degrees. So we've seen that even having these instruments in place, because that, for example, the Paris Agreement was, was as a result of COP21 that happened in France in 2015, and it's been a major benchmark for global climate action, even when we look at it in the context of differentiation or prescriptiveness, or on the question of legal bindingness. We've seen that it has contributed greatly to a reduction, whereas now the indication shows from the UNEP emissions gap report that we're headed to about 2.5. Still, that's half, virtually half of the 4 to 5 degrees that would have been headed to without climate diplomacy. So whereas it's incremental in nature, we can say that it is cumulative as well. That that those small gains over the years that have been registered, and I think some of the commentators and critics of the COP processes that have said that we need to scrap COP generally. I think what they miss is some of these smaller gains that we have attained over the last 30 years. And I think the solution should not be in disbanding or discarding or doing away with COP generally. I think the solution is in bettering. How do we then have conversations on bettering the COP processes? How do we have more equitable representation? But most importantly, how do we translate the complex discussions and negotiations at COP into meaningful action at the local level, where COP is, where climate change is fundamentally felt, and the communities at the grassroots that are bearing the sharpest brunt of the climate crisis? How do we ensure that we actually get the means of implementation on climate finance, capacity building, technology development, and transfer to direct them again to where they're needed the most in the communities that are at the very forefront of the climate crisis? So imagine a world without COP. Where would we be? Where would the world be? And once we agree that COP is important, then we need to then have the more difficult conversation on, bettering it, improving it, and honing it, on working out some of these difficult questions on accessibility, on translating pledges into meaningful contribution and meaningful action into implementation, but also understanding that ultimately nations remain sovereign, because again, that's the context that we're working in. You look at the nature of participants at COP, the fact that it's led by states. States remain sovereign, they remain independent, that kind of autonomy. So the fact that they're able to come together and even have these conversations over the years, I think it's something that is worth a celebration. So recognize how far we have come, but also recognize how far we still have to go in light of the decision of the ICJ that states have obligations. Yes, we need then to sort of work against that backdrop to see how we hold states accountable, but also recognize that the kind of complexity that is involved in climate negotiations, in climate change, in climate science, we can look at then how we can break that down into more comprehensible aspects for the youth, for the local communities, but also how we can translate that into meaningful action. So yes, we have the process, and we've seen some progress over the years, There's some challenges at hand, yes, but I think the solution is in, building on past gains, on past progress, to see how we can ensure that indeed the voices of those that are bearing the heaviest burdens of the crisis are brought front and center in climate negotiations. So thank you so much, Catalina, and everybody else for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Howard. It's always a pleasure to hear you. And I think you talk about really important aspects of this, since climate change is indeed a really complex issue. And we always hear about that is like so complicated, so technical, it requires scientific knowledge, but at the same time, it has so practical implications and concrete implication on the lives of so many people and communities that it requires necessarily this approach of justice. And don't forget about the climate justice and how we can understand the impact of this type of initiative, like not only COP30, but I like that you talk about like the entire process since COP started and where we're now, and how can we imagine a world without COPs, what type of outcome of things positive we can bring of this process, and always looking at this final goal of achieving a more just present and future, and to help all of the communities and countries that has more that are more impacted by the effects of climate change. So thank you very much. As well as the other speaker, if any of you want to say something to Howard, ask any question, please feel free to do it. We will do it at the end of the session after talking with our last speaker. That is, I would like to introduce it now. Her name is Gulnaz Jadigerova. She is a Chevening scholar from the Autonomous Republic of Karakalpakstan of Uzbekistan. She is studying a master in social change, environment and sustainability at the University of Manchester. And she's a climate advocate. She's a Global UGRAD alumna, a Climate Dialogues alumna, and currently she's pursuing this master with more than 5 years of eco-volunteering experience. She began her journey by engaging in local environmental initiative and later grew into a key organizer of nationwide eco-volunteering campaigns. Her work has focused on youth mobilization, environmental awareness, and strengthening community-based responses to climate change in one of Uzbekistan's most vulnerable regions. And finally, he has contributed to national climate policy process through her role as youth climate policy consultant for UNICEF Uzbekistan. And thanks to her commitment with youth advocacy, she participated in COP30. And we would like to hear about your thoughts on COP30. How was your participation? And specifically, we would like to discuss the impact of youth and advocacy in the context of climate change and how we can improve their representation in this type of negotiation. Thank you very much. Gulnaz, we would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Catalina, for warm welcoming, and thank you for Eddy, Jabri, and Howard for profound and accurate explanation of the COP processes, especially touching some of the difficulties accessing for youth, to get into the COP, getting the accreditation. So actually, I face this issue, so I will talk about that more. My background actually is not from the climate science or climate policy or even international relations. I did economics and management, and because of my eco-volunteering experience, because of my activism, so I organized many nationwide environmental campaigns in my country, because I was from that very water-scarce, water-stressed and vulnerable region, Karakalpakstan. It is autonomous republic within the Republic of Uzbekistan, and it's all located in Central Asia. As I worked as youth climate consultant for UNICEF Uzbekistan, I helped to launch and coordinate the network of young climate champions and co-organized Uzbekistan's first ever local conference of youth on climate change. Thanks to this work, actually, I was nominated to represent Uzbekistan youth voice at Conference of Youth 20 in Belém in Brazil. COI was organized by UNGO. UNGO is official constituency youth and children constituency of UNFCCC. It serves as a platform for young people globally to have their voice heard and influence international climate policy. Well, UNICEF Uzbekistan kindly supported my travel from Manchester to Belém and back. And the Ministry of Ecology of Uzbekistan provided my UNFCCC COP30 badge accreditation that I'm very thankful for. And I paid for my own food and accommodation. So I was kind of, like climate diplomat and a budget travel at the same time. Can you go to the next pages? Yeah, these are pictures from the local conference of youth from my country. We did the COP simulation and we had very nice coffee break. Next page. This is the continuation of from ELCOI conference. If you see that deserted area, it was a sea. Before Soviet Union extracted all water resources to plant crops, cotton in my country. So the sea became deserted area. So my dream was to show young people how the vulnerable communities are living and trying to survive in this kind of regions. Next page, please. This was my first COP, so I want to share mostly my impressions and reflections because I was not like that experienced in advanced level like Eddy, Jabri, or Howard because the COP process is so new for me. As I told you, I was just mostly active in eco-volunteering, so I came to the COP from really like from bottom up approach. So I imagine a climate conference, huge inside, and you feel like rainforest sauna. So from very cold Manchester, windy Manchester, I like ended up being in Belém, Brazil, which was very hot and humid, and then it was noisy because of loud ventilations inside, and Amazonian rain was so loud it could sometimes interrupt the negotiations, and actually, I'm not kidding. Sometimes you couldn't tell it was like someone fell down or applauding or was it thunder. It was like kind of mixed feeling being there. So in Blue Zone, this is the map of the Blue Zone. I got like lost and confused like many times. I'm really convinced that my steps being confusing around that area should count as my personal mitigation contribution. So in orange, you can see the main interest and registration. The purple zone, there were delegation pavilions of different countries and offices and thematic action rooms. And the C zone, which is like blue, on the bottom. So there were side events and special events happening. Actually, that was the coolest area where you can brace and have water. And then later, the area D, which is yellow, it was information and service hub where you could get your merches, the COP Brazil bags, or like the water bottle. And the red area, they were massively huge, and they were like plenary Amazons, the plenary tokens, and green zone entrance over there. So yeah, it was so huge. And for me, as a person who's attending the COP for the first time, like was very overwhelming, tiring, and I got lost many times. And navigating the COP places is also like kind of huge job. Next slide, please. These are just pictures from the venue. Do you see the globe? This is from the area see the blue zone. Yes, it is blue zone in blue zone where side events happened. Next slide. So I want now share my thoughts and insights, like what COP30 taught me. And as I told, like my first COP felt like being thrown to a big ocean, to the biggest projects where everyone argues, everyone cares, everyone talks, shares experience, organizes like side events, negotiates in the negotiating rooms, and actually no one has slept. I believe that Eddy, Jabri, and Howard can also agree. So I tried to follow some of the tracks, but it was hard for me because I was there only for 3 days. First week of the COP, only 3 days. I could just run around and see what are the plenaries, what are the adaptation finance talks, what kind of side events look like, what is like global stock take sessions look like. So yeah, I was very overwhelmed, but also completely energized. Especially, I was very amazed by the Jungo folks and Youth Negotiators Academy. These young people followed one negotiation track every day. They took notes like superheroes. They typed so fast, and they reported back to their governments that I just followed the track, just transition and adaptation, but I didn't report back to my government because I was just a youth delegate supported by UNICEF mostly. Well, I really admired those young people's discipline, while I also tried to find, to remember which pavilion offered the free snacks, free food, because having food, the COP venue, it's just struggle. Just one cup of coffee could cost you 7 or 8 like pounds. As Howard said, I want to touch some unfairness and injustice that I face in COP, uh, in COP venue. Brazil enabled actually to bring the indigenous community with around 2,000, I guess, 2,500 indigenous people attending, yet only 14% of them could access the blue zone where negotiation actually happened. So the same applies to young people. They were lots of young people, but they couldn't make meaningful interventions because of the lack of understanding, for example, or lack of experience, like me. So I face challenges that whoever goes to COP, they should go through training, how to navigate, how to make intervention, how to follow that track, and how to make the positions, how to prepare to make a speech, even how to make notes at the negotiation spaces. So as a young young youth delegate from Uzbekistan, I really struggled. And Howard also said that there were fossil fuel lobbyists on site, roughly 1 in every 25 participants. So they were kind of 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists. And you can imagine how many indigenous people and how many fossil fuel lobbyists we had at the COP negotiations. That's why we see the outcome was not that ambitious and progressive. Actually, I left COP with more questions than answers because it reminds me of my university courses from the Climate Emergency Technology and Society course, the debates about climate discourses, why some people act like fatalists, climate denialists, or others like egalitarian, individualists, or hierarchists. So the COP, actually, you can see all of them negotiating in real time. So for me, climate diplomacy, even it's very new for me, but it felt like it's still messy. We need to sort out, we need to reform some of the processes, but actually it's also necessary because we are facing different the types of climate change consequences, like what happened in Southeast Asia recently, in Philippines, in Indonesians, in Thailand, Vietnam. Actually, some of my friends even lost their homes. So people are still fighting with hope. That's why we need these spaces. But it's full of mess. Actually, this is my observation. I don't know how other people would feel. Can we go to the next slide? And now I want to touch on why youth climate governance matters, why youth matters. I want to say that one of my proudest moments and achievements for me, it's that the draft of national youth statement we developed ahead of LCOI in Uzbekistan was reflected in the global youth statement 2025, which was actually handed over to the UN Secretariat. And this document collected ideas from over 30,000 young people worldwide, and massive achievement by UNGO. And it covers everything from adaptation to climate finance, education, just transition, and intergenerational equity. So why is important? Because a child born during the pandemic in 2020 will face 7 times more heat waves and twice as many wildfires, 6 times more floods as their grandparents if we fail to keep warming below 1.5. So now we are facing all these issues, and young people, children, are the most vulnerable and they're the most affected by the consequences of climate change and global warming. That's why youth need real seats at the table, not in just photo, but in like policy making, budgeting, negotiations, even in mentorship, in education and implementation. That's what actually I'm fighting for. Can we go to the next slide? And I want to talk about my contribution and what I did, actually. I just didn't attend to get lost at the COP venue. Actually, I had my role. I was a speaker at the side event called Youth Shaping Climate Policy Voices from Central Asia, Azerbaijan, and Mongolia, where I shared how we organized the very first LCOI in Uzbekistan and how youth influenced Uzbekistan's NDC 3.0. And I also joined the session Advancing Uzbekistan's NDC from Ambition to Action, where youth and national delegates from my country presented our progress together. Outside of panels, I got a really kind of reality check about climate policy. So it's political, it's exhausting, it's slow, it's emotional. So anyone who goes COP, I guess it really requires to learn more, to gain the deep knowledge, expertise, even just train the courage, persistence, and humility. So I came to Manchester like more realistic and like grounded and more committed to strengthening my expertise so that I can contribute to evidence-based climate policy and for my country and for vulnerable communities. And can we go to next page? So yeah, and none of this would have happened without the support of Young Climate Champions, LCOI Uzbekistan, COP30, UNICEF Uzbekistan support, and the Ministry of Ecology, and all the brilliant young people I met the COP. So COP didn't just teach me about the world, so it reminded me why does actually this work matter for climate justice, and why should keep being strong and fighting. So I guess this journey, the COP, even if it's my first experience attending it, but it's just the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gulnaz. That was really inspiring, and congratulations for being part of this first COP. And thank you to share us your experience. It seems like 3 days, and it looks like so like long process full of emotions and learning, and you probably met like a lot of people. So I think it's really valuable that you share that experience, and it shows how it's not only like the first step, and it's, I think it's really important, it's like to be part of it, but at the same time is how we can make everything to make actually like inclusive. And if you're, it's not only that you're part of that event, it's like how you can move in that event with people you can meet, how you can make intervention, which people, which actor can intervene actually in the negotiation, as you said, maybe do some training, maybe like prepare to actually have a meaningful participation of the young people as well as other communities. I think your work in Uzbekistan and this global youth statement is really important, and I'm sure that in your future you will continue participating in this type of initiative. So thank you very much for joining us, for being part of this conversation, and I will now ask Katerine that's going to search if there's any question, comments of the participation of our speaker. Thank you very much.
Okay, we don't have questions,
But
but
maybe open, maybe someone wants to
okay,
ask
okay.
now.
Yeah, it's time for questions. If someone has some question, please could you write in the chat, or
It
maybe
could be opinions
oh,
or
exactly. So we will wait for your opinion also.
Maybe I have a question to Howard.
Okay, Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, like Cheveners who study at the University of Edinburgh, you were so lucky that you have the COP Cafe. It's kind of interesting club. Can we join it like online? At least online, being present with you. I've never been in Edinburgh, but I would love to go and be part of the conversation.
Oh, can I answer that directly?
Yeah. Go ahead, Howard.
of course.
Okay. So that's an interesting one because the COP Cafe is an event that happens sort of during COP. We sort of bring, and this year the theme was bringing COP30 to Edinburgh, bridging global ambition with local action. And I think it was the second time that it was happening. And we sort of have some other activities around that. We have one of the sessions happening, and I'll probably share the link, happening early next year, which is looking at doing an assessment of what happened, stroke did not happen at COP30. So we'll be having some academics, I'll be joining them as well to just assess COP30, generally getting into the outcome document of COP30, what was on the agenda, on the provisional agenda, on the supplementary agenda, on the ultimate agenda, but also what the substance of the outcome document. But also interestingly, sort of looking forward to COP31, actually looking forward to the meetings of the subsidiary bodies happening in Bonn in June, and then looking at COP31, which is going to have an interesting outlook because it looks like there was a deep deadlock between Australia and Turkey. And so Turkey seems to have had the better share, but I think there's going to be some sort of collaboration in terms of the delivery of COP31 between Turkey and Australia as well, with I think there's going to be a major pre-COP event as well in the spirit of collaboration. And I think for me, probably what we could also consider is advocating for accessibility to more digital passes for COP. For young people that cannot afford to go to COP, I want to be part of the conversations. But also, I think finally, for the young people that have the opportunity to go to COP to realize that it's a privilege, and so to make the very best of that opportunity to amplify the voices of those that have not been able to make it, of the young people, of the youth, of the local communities, to try to bring the voices and aspirations front and center. So yeah, but I'll share with you the link to that event as and when we have it early next year. Yeah, thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Howard. We had some questions here from Kesia. Kesia is a Chevening also. Let me to check. Yeah, Kesia is from Nambia doing her master in energy system and data analytics, as you said, and she has some questions. First of all, is for countries like South Africa, Egypt, Algeria that are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, do you believe that COP30 just transition approach can really enable this reform? Are the structural changes required truly reflected in the indices? Anyone can reply this question, please? Howard, Eddy, or Julna? The second question is how can this country still ensure job security, reskilling, and economic development in the province and regions where fossils dominate? We have different questions, but we can you can reply. Oh, Howard, you are in mute, please. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Kesh. Kesh is a good friend of mine. Quite a great deal of questions, very complex questions at that. For instance, the first one on the question of the just transition approach. And again, I'd mentioned this when I was sharing my thoughts. It's one of those really, really, really sticky issues because when you look at the outcome document from COP30, it was not so strong on the question of fossil fuel phase out. So there's a whole just transition approach, and you find that it's easier to talk about it in the abstract, just transition work program and mitigation work program. But when you get to the substance of it, the transitioning away from fossil fuels, it becomes very difficult. But the confidence we can have is, for example, when you look at what's happening in China, and I think that really introduces us to a more interesting debate on the economics of the transition. You find that at present, I think the cheapest source of electricity should be solar, and that by far defeats the fossil fuel sources. But it's not even because fundamentally of the global architecture on climate diplomacy. It's fundamentally around the economics of the transition that China has been able to seize the opportunity. And at the present, they're making, I think, about 50% of the global EVs. And it's not just the EVs, but the infrastructure around that, the solar panels, the wind turbines, many of these clean energy solutions, and they're sort of leading on that. And the International Energy Agency has indicated that they're going to lead in the foreseeable 5 to 10 years to the extent of even about 60 to 70%. Why? Because they've mastered the economics of the transitions. I think for some of these economies, once we make clean energy solutions more affordable and much cheaper and more cost competitive or more cost effective, we can be able to bring them around the table, even with the decarbonization of their economies, looking at it from an economic perspective. And then there's a question on job security, reskilling, and economic development in provinces and regions where fossils dominate. And again, last week we had this event in Scotland, which is looking at the climate, sort of reviewing the climate action plan of Scotland going forward. And one of the aspects there is on the just energy transition. So most times when we talk about just energy transition, we always look at it from transitioning away from fossil fuels to clean energy, but we don't usually have a deeper conversation on what that means, for example, for the labor that is heavily involved currently in the fossil fuel industry. And it's interesting to see that actually the International Labour Organization has done a great deal of work on this, looking at what the just energy transition means for the global labor market. And the IE has also looked at that in one of the flagship reports, indicating that some of the skills that are involved in the conventional energy sector, there's a need for sort of like reskilling and upskilling, but it's I mean, if you're an engineer, for example, in the fossil fuel industry, that there's a foundation that can be built upon for you to find meaningful employment in the greener economy or with a green transition. And so there are challenges, yes, because if we're going to decommission some oil wells and fields, and then we're going to invest more in renewable energy, there's a skills gap there that might be breached. But I'd like to invite you, Kesh, to look at the work of the International Labour Organization, particularly on that nexus between the just energy transition and the implications it has on the global labor market. It's a very good discussion on that, and we can follow it up when we catch up, Kesh, on that. I think the third question is to do with the African context, especially with SADC, where finance remains a core barrier to transition. So the question on responsibilities from developed countries in supporting the unlocking of this capital for the large-scale decarbonization. And again, this goes back to the conversation on the means of implementation on climate finance, on capacity building and technology development and transfer. So I've seen even with the Baku to Belém roadmap to 1.3, it's one of those major the focus areas. Okay, how do we get to transition from the commitments, from the pledges to actually get the meaningful contributions from these countries? And I think this remains an elusive issue. I'm going to be very honest with you, Kesh, and indeed everybody who's listening. It's going to be very, very, very difficult, because the first step to that is the recognition of what we call a fair share of the climate crisis, like countries recognizing and accepting their fair share of the historic and current global emissions, which is still very difficult because many countries consider climate finance some form of charity, something that they do out of their goodwill and some sort of philanthropy and egalitarian approach to the climate crisis, without doing it from the place of recognizing that indeed they have caused this challenge and they are mandated, they're obliged to contribute meaningfully to addressing it, which really goes to the heart of climate justice. And really the requirement that those that have contributed the most should bear the burdens, because again, those that have contributed the least are the ones bearing the sharpest brunt of the climate crisis, going back to the polluter pays principle in the global discourse on this. So it's a very sticky, very contentious issue. And so transitioning away from looking at climate finance, for example, as some sort of charity and aid to getting countries to respond. But we can find some solace in the findings of the International Court of Justice on this, that countries have an obligation in light of the principle of common but efficient responsibilities and respective capabilities to contribute their fair share. But also the findings of the court sort of lay the foundation for private entities to be held accountable even within these countries. Because sometimes when we say that there are major emitters, and we say the US, we say China, we talk about even some of the emerging and developing economies now, like India and Brazil itself, you find that whereas we say it's the countries within these countries, the private actors that are actually responsible for these emissions. And so whereas the obligations are on the states themselves as primary and principal duty bearers, there are sort of avenues of holding these private duty bearers within these countries responsible. It could be through climate litigation, it could be through mandated responsibilities by the states, but also it could be through advocating for some sort of consumer shifts within these countries and investing and making more available and more cost effective some of the cleaner solutions within these countries to sort of disincentivize the investment in fossil fuel alternatives. And then on the question of how sticky the conversation is, I mean, you have countries like Saudi Arabia. So how do we hold some of these countries accountable? And so you find, for example, actually, and this is the irony again, because in some of these countries, for instance, we've seen projects and initiatives like the Master Initiative in the United Arab Emirates that is focusing on renewable energy and looking at, for example, the kind of solar capacity that these countries have, again, because of their geographical setting. And so you find that in many ways, the question of accountability really goes to the heart of the climate diplomatic regime, the need to hold countries accountable, but also recognizing that these countries are sovereign countries, they are autonomous countries. So how do we hold them accountable to the commitments that they have made? So much work has indeed been done under the UNFCCC, under the COP processes and the presidencies, but also with the emerging trends with climate diplomacy, with the findings of the International Court of Justice. But much more work remains to be done by climate advocates like you and myself to ensure that we continue advocating for more accountability, for more equity, for more transparency, but over and above for climate justice in its truest sense. Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now, because we had some question, but it's late, a little late, please. So we will share some news for you guys. Okay, can you see my picture, my screen? Gata, gata.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the next step I will recommend to you is to follow us in Instagram and LinkedIn and in WhatsApp. So Catalina just already is to send the link of our social platform. So if you want to follow our events, our news, so please follow us. Then we will have events. So many people write then if we will have some events. For example, Catalina mentioned that we have five groups. One of them is policy, governance and law, sustainable finance and business, energy infrastructure and communities, science, innovation and technology, global health, food security and biodiversity. So next year we will implement 2 events for each group. So please follow us in our social media. Then our next event is Voices of Impact, Chevening Leaders in Sustainability. It will be in 17 December from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. So we will have amazing speakers also. For example, people from Chile, Uruguay, and Mexico, they will be in this event. They have high positions and they will share about their career lives, how Chevening helped them in order to have impact in their career lives. So you join us in this day. So thank you so much for this day. If you had some questions also, you have our social media, you can write any questions, or if you have some suggestion also, please go ahead. And now it's time to say to you goodbye. So thank you so much. See you on 17 December. So thank you so much, Gulna, Catalina,
Thank you. Maybe we can take a
Edward,
picture of all of us.
Eddy. Yeah, please. Now we will take
If
the
you
picture.
can turn on your cameras, it will be amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you very much to everyone that participated today. Yes, thank you. I will wait for most of you. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. 1, 2, and wait, sorry. Now, thank you. Have a
Okay.
nice evening,
Thank you so
and I
much.
hope to see you on our next event. And thank you so much to everyone, especially for our speaker, to being part of this event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.